I've just come back from a conference in San Francisco, and while I was there, I met some, I want to say some old friends, but I mean friends of long standing, not especially old friends, and had a chance to chat with them and to catch up on some old memories. And one of the friends reminded me of this book that she'd edited some years ago, and I'd contributed a chapter to it, and she was kind enough to say that her students enjoyed my chapter. So I'm going to tell you about that chapter now. The title of my chapter is Critical Thinking and Thought Control. So critical thinking. We'll come to the thought control piece later. And it's not an original idea, it's an idea based on the work of Edward de Bono. And the idea is that we think in various different ways. Critical thinking, we tend to think of critique, criticism, being negative. And that's certainly one of the ways that we think. We think negatively. We have an idea and we start asking, what's wrong with it? But that's not all that critical thinking is about. Critical thinking is about being evaluative. And if something has positive value, then we ought to be thinking about positive values as well. So positive thinking is another mode of thinking. In some ways, positive thinking is easier. If you have an idea, you think that it's going to work, of course you can see all the good things about it. So it's not necessary to, well, you're sure it's going to work. And we see many politicians, they've got a policy they think is going to work. They don't bother to think about the negatives, the downside, the possible ways it could go wrong. But if we're going to be evaluative, you need to be doing both the positive and the negative. Partly so that you can do a weighing up and decide what you're going to do, but also if you can see the negative points of view, then you can provide counter arguments. You can say, I think we ought to do this. There may be people who think that that's not a very good idea, but I've got this argument and that argument to support it. So seeing both sides of an argument is not just about being open-minded and being broad-minded, it's also about being able to provide a better argument for the case that you finally decide upon. So once you've decided that the positives outweigh the negatives, or the negatives outweigh the positives, the fact that you've looked at the other side will help you to structure an argument and to make a case. But those are not the only two ways that we think about things. We also think about things emotionally. We have a gut reaction, we have a feeling about things. Now, generally speaking, we're taught that that's not a good thing. We're not allowed to be carried away by emotion. Reasoning, weighing up the positives and negatives is more important. But what de Bono says is, don't try and avoid the fact we have emotions. It's actually a good thing that we feel strongly about some things. We wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if we didn't think it was worthwhile. So it's before we start with reason, we have an emotional response. Having an emotional response is not a bad thing, but we need to be aware that it is an emotional response. We're not trying to deny our emotions. If there was one thing Freud was right about, is if you try to repress your emotions, they'll bubble out somewhere else in some other part of your work. So it's acknowledging that we have the emotions, acknowledging that we have the feelings. I do feel strongly about this particular way of dealing with classrooms. I do feel positively about this person, I feel negatively about that person, but I'm going to struggle to treat them both fairly, even though I like one and can't really quite get on with the way this other person thinks. So it's not about denying emotions. Being emotional is not the difference between being subjective or objective. It's not about being carried away by emotions. We're all motivated at a basic level by emotions. It's acknowledging the role that emotions play in our decision making and giving them their proper weight and not being ruled by, not being carried away by emotions. Well, that's not the only three ways we think. We might also think creatively. We might think about things in a different way. Try to think of a new and stimulating idea. Now that's not easy. It's not easy to be creative. One of the suggestions that de Bono offers us in creative thinking is to try and look at the puzzle backwards. It's sometimes easier to arrive at a conclusion if you say, well, I'd like to get to that position. What would it be like to be in that position? How would I think about having arrived at? Sometimes if you're just wandering around the streets, it's easier to find your way back rather than forward. You can see the routes differently. I was walking through the streets of Beijing looking for a shop, walked straight past it without noticing it. It was only coming back in the opposite direction that I got a different view of things and could see the shop that I was looking for. So having an idea that's original can sometimes come just from seeing the problem from a different perspective. Another possibility that de Bono suggests is to introduce a random element. Pick up a dictionary, open it at a random page, pick a word. Does that word suggest anything that stimulates a new thought? So there's a creative thinking is a different way of thinking about things, just to turn them up and see whether you can have an idea that you wouldn't have thought of before. Asking other people is also a good way of getting a different perspective on things. And then we come to probably the two most difficult ways of thinking. This way of thinking is a kind of neutral way, a questioning way. So we might say, I'm looking at this particular problem. What do I need to know that I don't know now? What do I need to know that would help me solve the problem? I want a plan for a holiday. Let me investigate the prices to see where I can afford to go. Let me see what the timetables of planes, trains and buses are so that I can get some practical information in order to solve the problem. I want to design an educational system for this city. How many children are there in the city? The physicist Fermi used to ask his students questions like, how many piano tuners are there in New York? That's to get an idea of how many people have pianos, how many times a year does a piano need tuning, therefore how many piano tuners should be living in New York to meet your estimate. There are things that we don't know, but we can find out, or we can estimate, or we can try to think around ways of putting some facts into the thinking that we're doing. Now, people don't like doing that. If you try this, if you ask people, is it a good idea to ban social media for children? Is it a good idea to have one-way street systems? Is it a good idea to have pedestrian area in the middle of our town? You ask people questions like that, they'll give you an answer, yes or no. They won't say, wait a minute, I need more information, because people like answers. They don't. So white hat thinking means putting aside for the minute, I'm not going to find an answer immediately, I need some more information that I will weigh up to put into my thinking. I need more information that will be the basis for my reasoning. How heavy is the traffic in the central area of town? How many hours a day do children spend on social media? What's the effect on them of having social media? What's the effect of them of not having social media? All of those things, we need more information before we can make a clear-cut decision about some of these policies that we might be weighing up. And the sixth and final way of thinking for De Bono, I suppose we might call meta-thinking, or deciding which of those 5 ways of thinking we're going to use. Because if you're going to think properly, if you're going to think carefully, you need a balance between all of those 5 different ways of thinking. So you need to have at the back of your mind, what am I doing now? I'm reacting emotionally to the idea of social media. I wasn't brought up with social media, I'm not deeply attached to it, but I've got an emotional and negative response, so my emotions are adding to my negative thinking. Let me think about all the reasons for banning social media. Let's think about the negative things about social media. Let's think about the positive things about social media. Let's weigh in the emotional effect, the emotional impact of the topic on me. Let's think about those things where we would like more information before making a decision. Let's try and think of some original thoughts, some different perspectives, something new. And balancing all of those by thinking about our thinking as we do it, we can be more effective. And De Bono's point is that a balance between these is necessary in order to make sound judgments. You need to be doing all of them. And that can be done by monitoring your own thinking, or you could actually get into groups with your friends and assign, never mind whether you believe positively this is a positively good idea or not, be devil's advocate, argue for the other side. See whether you can think of something really original. That's always going to be difficult. And as I say, one of the most difficult is that neutral. Don't make a decision now, but tell me what information that you would like to have in order to make a decision. And the point, or one of the points that De Bono makes is, we've been brought up with an emphasis on negative thinking. As I said to you at the beginning, critical thinking, we think of criticism and critique as negative, finding out what's wrong with an argument, picking holes in it. We've all been to school and we've all handed in work and we've all got it handed back to us with red marks on it where the teacher has found out what we've done wrong. Our system of education very often trains us to think negatively, think about what's gone wrong. Well, we don't just need to be thinking about what's gone wrong, we need these other ways of thinking. Now my chapter was called Critical Thinking and Thought Control, and this is not about controlling other people and being mind control. Critical thinking and mind control is about controlling your own mind, controlling your own thinking, being in control of which bit of thinking you're doing next. For that I turn to John Dewey and his work, How We Think, and his account of what we do thinking well and thinking badly. And he says that the problem that many people have is that they jump to a conclusion. They've got a policy, their first reaction is their final reaction. they jump to a conclusion. You've got a way of doing things, you stick with the way, whether it's the best way or not. You don't weigh up all the alternatives, you don't weigh up all the possibilities, you don't think about trying to find a different perspective on things. You jump straight in, that's your answer. You don't think about whether you need more information, jump straight into the answer. Now, Dewey's point is that that's bad thinking. Good thinking involves suspending judgment for a moment and waiting until all the evidence is in. And once all the evidence is in, you can make the best possible decision. And Dewey says you need to control your thinking, you need to be measured, take your time over making decisions. If you're not controlling your thoughts, chances are that somebody else is. So thought control is about being your own master, being the captain of your own ship. And so critical thinking, at its best, is about thinking that is managed, about thinking that is timely, about thinking that the person who is doing the thinking is able to marshal absolute best powers of their mind that are available to them to make the best decisions. It's not, no catchwords, no special catchwords, not about being subjective, not about being objective. It's about balancing the different ways of looking at things and coming to an all-round judgment about the balance of positive arguments, negative arguments, the emotional value, taking into account new perspectives, and being prepared to collect evidence to fill the gaps in your knowledge. And all of that needs management, and that means meta-thinking. You need to understand your own ways of thinking. So that's my brief coverage for you of how you might try to manage your thinking in order to be able to think better and to have more control over your own thought processes.